Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast. I'm Allistair, your host. In this episode of What It Takes on the Champion Minded podcast, I get to chat with legendary strength and conditioning coach and co-founder of MBSC in Boston, Mike Boyle. MBSC, which stands for Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, is without a doubt one of the most successful sports performance facilities in the United States. Mike is without a doubt one of the persons that I've been most influenced throughout my sports and performance career. I've been a massive fan of Mike's probably since around the year 2000. In fact, many of the methods I used while working with world-class athletes come from his work and philosophies. Since the beginning of me launching this podcast, Mike is someone who I've wanted desperately to get onto the show, so luckily I was able to finally get him on. He's had an incredible career spanning well over 35 years. Prior to co-founding Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, he served as the head strength and conditioning coach at Boston University for 15 years. Also, for the past 25 years, he's been the strength and conditioning coach for men's ice hockey at Boston University. Mike was also at the Boston Red Sox in 2013 that won the World Series. He also served as the strength and conditioning coach for the Boston Bruins of the NHL. He was also the strength and conditioning coach for the 1998 U.S. Women's Olympic Ice Hockey Team, gold medalist in Nagano, and 2014 silver medalist in Sochi. Well, if that doesn't impress you, then definitely nothing will. He's also an international speaker, author, and has produced over 20 instructional videos in the area of strength and conditioning available through MF Athletic. Now, in this episode, we talk about how MBSC has not only survived but thrived during the pandemic, what constitutes a great coach or trainer, the system, standards, and values within MBSC, his relationship with fellow legends in the industry, Mark Verstegen and Al Vermeil, what traits define the best athletes from the rest, mistakes coaches and trainers make, why it's important to surround yourself with the right people, advice he would give parents of kids who play sports. We also talk about the influences and mentors he's had in his career. We speak a little bit about his time at the Red Sox. He shares some social media tips and so much more. Guys, it's a killer show. I know you're going to love this one. Without further ado, this is Mike Boyle. Mike, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I can't believe it took us this long to get together.
I know, I'm the one to blame for that. It's long overdue, but it's an honor to have you on because I know you're such a busy guy. But first of all, let's start by asking you how the last 6 months have been for you with the COVID-19 situation.
Interesting, I would say, is a good word to describe it. One, it made me realize that I'm probably a little more ready to retire than I thought I was because I didn't mind it as much as I thought I would. I did a lot of work on my house, did a lot of work in my yard. I was not as put off as I thought I would be. So that was probably the first 3 months. And then obviously we had to pick our business up and build our business back up and train outside and deal with all the governmental bullshit basically that we've been dealing with over the last couple of months and try to come up with COVID plans and a program structure that would allow us to handle the kind of volume that we're used to handling in a safe and effective way. So I'm trying to think, July, August, September. That's been almost 4 months now that we've been really immersed in that. And it was funny. I wasn't in a hurry to go back to work. And then I found myself, bam, like right back in it. And then very much challenged by, hey, we got to figure this out. We've got to build this up because at one point we were sitting there with this idea, wow, 20 years of our life to build this business. And it may be gone. This, what we thought was an asset that at some point we'd sell to somebody, to our employees, and sort of carry on might just be done. And I was very determined that was not going to happen. And I said to you before we actually kind of went live, we're back to about 75%, which for the fitness industry is very good. So I'm happy about that.
That's incredible. Now, listen, in your opinion, obviously, you've been in the gym industry for a long time, but Obvious reasons would obviously be rent of why some gyms have closed, but why have some gyms thrived and survived during this time and other gyms haven't, in your opinion? Obviously, there's the rental of paying rent every month for a facility, but you know, actually, let me refer to a quote that you use there at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning: that people won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Do you feel that the relationship you have with your clients has been a massive factor to you thriving, so to say?
I would say yes. We were very lucky. We had a lot of loyal clients. We had clients who stayed with us doing Zoom workouts and Facebook workouts and Instagram Live. And we had some people who just paid and I had a couple of friends who would just text me and say, hey, make sure you put my billing through this month.
Wow.
Because they wanted to help us to survive. There really is one of the things that I took, and I always say, I'll use the C word here, CrossFit, but I always tried to look at CrossFit and see the good, and the good was the community building part and the loyalty building part and how passionate people were about being a CrossFitter. And I always thought that's what we have to keep trying to do at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. And you've read all the books, Raving Fans. There's so many books I'm reading. The Customer Rules right now by Lee Cockrell. But I think being a customer-focused business and not a transaction-focused business is a big part of what helped us survive. But the other part, I have to give my business partner, Bob Hansen, is a bit of a squirrel. And he's the type of guy who always wanted to have what I would look at, I would have looked at last year and said an absurd amount of money in the bank. I was never, I never really worried about it because it was our money and it was in the bank, and not that it was, earning a lot of interest or anything, but it was still our money. And then when this crisis hit, I remember thinking, God, thank God Bob wants to have so much money in the bank, because I knew we were going to be okay for 2 or 3 months with no revenue. And that's a really good feeling, particularly when you think you're going to be closed down maybe for a week or for 2 weeks or whatever it was going to be. And then as it dragged on, I thought we might be a survivor in this thing because we've always run, and it's really Bob, it's not me, he's the financial guy. He's run a really responsible business. We don't owe anybody money. We don't have any debt besides the obvious, our employee salaries and our, rent, but we don't have any accumulated debt. We don't carry any long-term debt. And we actually have a significant amount of money that we've put away for exactly something like this that you think is never going to happen. And then suddenly it does.
Yeah. I mean, it came from completely nowhere. I mean, nobody saw this coming at all. So, the fact that you were in a good position before that, I mean, it's just so important to, and you just mentioned there being customer focused as well. But you mentioned one thing there. You spoke about the C word, CrossFit, and I know obviously you have your strong points of view about certain things, which is great. But one thing I've always admired about you, Mike, is that you're open-minded and you're willing to learn from basically anybody. Programs that you don't particularly agree with. You're a person who looks for the better in those things. Tell us how important that is, because it's an industry where there's just so much. Watching on Twitter and watching on social media, there's so much, squabbling and fighting and disagreeing and so on and so forth, instead of us just, being more open-minded to things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's having strong opinions, and then there's also being averse to learning. I don't think those are necessarily the same thing. I actually wrote a quote down the other day for this presentation that I'm doing, and it said, I 100% believe that I'm right up to the moment that I realize that I'm wrong. And, so I'm very strong in my beliefs, but at the same time, I'm constantly listening. I'm almost waiting and challenging people, like, change my mind. Show me I'm wrong. Show me what you're doing that's better. Because ultimately, and I know you feel like I feel, all I really want to do is deliver the best service to our athletes and clients that I can. I don't have any, any dog in the fight, any skin in the game in terms of whether it's CrossFit or Olympic lifting or powerlifting or whatever it is. None of those things matter to me. What matters to me is, am I delivering the highest quality product that I can possibly deliver to this person? And if that means in maybe some ways, like, hey, maybe completely avoiding Olympic lifting or powerlifting or CrossFit, or maybe incorporating certain aspects of what they're doing, then I'm going to do that, because ultimately all I really care about is what the end result is. That our fitness-oriented clients feel better first and look better secondarily, and that our professional clients are employed and making money. That's really the end game.
Mm. Mike, I was actually going to start this interview with going back in the history of your career, which I obviously do want to get into a little bit. But while we're on about MBSC, you've obviously been a success as well because of the high standards that you've driven and the values. Could you share some of those with us? What the values and standards are like there at MBSC?
Well, I think it's incredibly simple. I tell everybody, I think people give us credit for being really good business people. And I've said this numerous times, but if you look at something and say, if you care about your employees and you care about your clients and you charge a reasonable price and you have a really good product, you should be successful in any business endeavor that you choose to go into. I don't think any of that is rocket science. I think, and obviously I've read your books and I think we think alike, but the basic sort of golden rule stuff, do unto others as we would have them, as you would have them do unto you. If you can just adhere to a few really simple things like that, then everything else falls into place. I was thinking about this conversation a little bit before we started, and I worked for a guy named Jack Parker, who is a legendary hockey coach. Jack is the winningest coach in one sport at one school in the history of the NCAA. So he won almost 100 games, all at Boston University.
Wow.
And he would always talk about guys, we just have to worry about what the next right thing is. And I always loved that. I kind of adopted that into my own life. Like, let's just think about what the next right thing is. And sometimes people get too far ahead of themselves, and you talk to people and say, well, let's tell them this. And I'm kind of like, well, that's not the next right thing. That's composing a lie for whatever reason to try to cover up or save face or whatever you might be doing at that time, as opposed to looking at yourself and saying, okay, what's the next right thing? Okay, what's the situation that we're in? What's the next right thing that we need to do? And we've always operated that way, and we've always operated from the idea that we weren't in it for the money. And so if you think about it, I'm saying all these things to you that I guess, if you listed them all in, don't be in it for the money. And some people say, well, it's a business. I'm like, yeah, you can have a business and run the business, but I'm in the business because I want to be really good at what I do, not because I want to be a millionaire. But I do believe that I'll get to be a millionaire by being really good at what I do. But it's the cart and horse idea, in terms of I want to keep the horse firmly in front of the cart at all times, and keep looking at this and saying, knowing what's important, knowing what matters. All of these things are central to our business mission, and then we try to select people, I feel like, that think similarly to me. People, as you said, people who give a shit. I always talk about, we had a football coach who used to always say, his compliment for a player was, he's got a give a shit meter that runs really high. And I always look at that and think, that's what I want. I want kids working for me that have a give a shit meter that runs really high. If you don't have that, then you're probably not going to last very long with us, because you need to care about your clients. You need to care about, sort of the right and wrong. And there's so much I could cliche to death, I guess, but that's probably at least a synopsis of how we look at things.
What I've picked up from the conversation, obviously following you for numerous years now, I think even back to 2000, pre-Twitter time, I was a massive fan of yours. In fact, you were probably the biggest influence in my career, together with Mark Verstegen. And I only met Mark once, but obviously, I had all your DVDs and so on and so forth, and followed your philosophy. So before I forget, at the end of this conversation, I just want to acknowledge you for that, and for how many people that you've helped, that you probably will never hear from. But from what I can see throughout your career, Mike, is that you've invested in people around you who bring something to the table. For example, you have a business manager, and you've invested in marketing, so on and so forth. So that's obviously been a major factor to your success there as well at MBSC, is that you get advice from other people. Now, I was reading an article the other day of Jurgen Klopp of Liverpool, and I know that you worked with I think Daniel Sturridge, it was a few years ago, the striker. And Jurgen spoke about, he's not the complete coach. He will surround himself with people that complement his areas of weakness. Would you say that you would be the same person in that philosophy and that viewpoint?
Maybe even taking it a step further now at this stage of my career in terms of I would like to surround myself with people that I think are going to be better than me. I want to surround myself with that next generation because I think it's different in coaching versus running a business too, because I need to have people around that I really see as the future and people that I look at and think they can take this thing over when I decide to walk away. And I've got guys like that now, like Kevin Carr and Brendan Rierick and Steve Bigelow. And I could keep going on, Vinny Toledo and Joe Squazzeri. I mean, there's just a bunch of people that we have working, and they're all really strong coaches and really strong people who I can see continuing to move forward what we're doing and who aren't going to need me. Because there's like I said, you like quotes like I like quotes, but I love the quote, the goal of the coach is to eliminate the coach. And when you're doing a really, really good job, you don't need to be a big presence anymore. The 2 years that I was with the Red Sox, I was talking to somebody about this, and I said someone who didn't know what was going on would not have had any idea what my role was if they watched. Because they would have been like, is Mike Pat's assistant? Like, what does Mike really do? Because we had a major league conditioning coach there, and I was his boss. But I wanted to make it really obvious to everybody that I wasn't his boss. I didn't want guys to think that Pat was just there to do my bidding and to sort of do the things that I didn't want to do. I wanted them to view me as Pat's assistant. And some of the guys I think did that, and some of the guys would make comments to me, especially some of the smarter guys, the guys who got it, and they'd be like, "You're actually in charge, aren't you?" And I'd be like, "Well, maybe. Maybe I am in charge. Maybe I'm not. Why? What's it to you?" kind of thing. And they just laugh. But I think that's really good coaching is when you can you get to the point where you don't have it. Like I don't have an ego anymore. I'm not. I guess I do. I shouldn't say I don't. I still worry about, is someone going to like my book? Does someone think my talk was good? That kind of stuff. Yeah, I guess that does still bother me. But I don't need to be the front man. I look at it, it's like being in a band and thinking I can just be on the side and be the bass player, and no one's ever going to know that I'm the guy that started the band and that I'm the thought process behind the whole thing. I want them looking at the lead singer and looking at the lead guitar player and thinking these guys are unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I view it now, and I think that's what allows me to live the life that I lead, which is one that I'm really happy with. I'm not, as I said, I'm not constantly trying to shove myself to the front, which is, and you kind of alluded to it a few minutes ago. Ego is a massive problem in our field, and I think it's a massive problem in our field because so many people started lifting weights because they didn't feel good about themselves. And started lifting weight. I want to be bigger. I want to be stronger. I want people to notice me. That kind of look at me sort of phenomenon. And for a lot of people, they can't get away from that in their coaching life. And I think that's problematic.
Well, it borderlines on humility and confidence to do that, to be able to step back. In writing my first book, 7 Keys to Being a Great Coach, I was observing a lot of coaches, not just through video, but being actually on location, and people like Eddie Jones, the Australian rugby coach who's coaching England now, Jurgen Klopp, Bill Belichick, Mike Krzyzewski. I spent a little bit of time up in Duke last year. Is that they're able to step back and let other people run the session. They're not the ones that are involved with everything. They're stepping back and letting their 2 assistants or 3 assistants take charge of things, and that's, as you said, the sign of a great coach is that, they don't need you anymore. You're able just to be in the background, so to say. So it's very, very, very similar. But let me ask you this, Mike. Who have been the big influences in your life and in your career?
I've been super lucky. So you start getting into, like I said, background. So I show up at Springfield College in 1977. And my dorm director, now you may not be enough of an NFL aficionado to know this, but my dorm director is a guy named Mike Wojcik. Mike Wojcik and Tom Brady are tied for most Super Bowl rings in the history of the NFL. And up until last year, Mike had more than Tom. Mike has got 3 from Dallas and 3 from New England. But he's my dorm director. So I always talk about like sort of the outliers moments. You get dropped in the hothouse without realizing it. In grad school at the same time is Rusty Jones. Rusty is the longest tenured guy in the NFL right now. He's still in Indianapolis coaching. He actually has retired once and come back already, but I'm going to say Rusty, 66, 67 years old. And then we had a guy from University of Hawaii teaching weight training named Bruce Buckby, who was an original pupil of Bill Starr's at University of Hawaii. And if you again, follow early strength training, Bill wrote Strong Shall Survive, which might have been the original good book on strength training. And so these guys were at Springfield when I'm there. And I'm surrounded by them, and I'm, chasing them around and asking them questions and just living the life. I'm the pain in the ass kid that won't go away. That's, follow them in the weight room. And then I get out and I end up in Boston, and I get to meet Johnny Parker, who, again, one of the winningest strength coaches in NFL history. He's at the Patriots when I'm at Boston University. And then I made a point of introducing myself to Al Vermeil because I had watched Al's, again, VHS tapes, if you can, you want to get, I don't know what year that was, but I was very strongly influenced by Al and thought that Al's stuff was great. So I invited Al to come out and visited our facility and speak to our staff. This was probably, 15 years ago, maybe. So, we're talking early 2000s. And so that was great. And I met Mark, actually, you talk about Mark Verstegen. Mark was one of the really big influences on me, even though he's 10 years younger. I went and met him down in Bradenton when he was at IPI before Exos ever started. When he was 30, I was 40. And I just was so impressed by him. And kind of, he almost, I hate to say it, it sounds like an ass-kissing statement, but he's almost got a little bit of an aura to him. You know what I mean? Like, he's really one of those guys that when you meet him, even in the very beginning, you're sort of like, okay, this guy's got, whatever that it factor is, he's got it.
I agree.
And I knew that right away with Mark, and I was very taken by what they were doing from a programming standpoint, by him, by his thought process. So we've been great friends for 20 years as a result of that meeting. And that meeting was a result of me knowing Darrell Eto, who was one of Mark's kind of right-hand guys at Exo. There's been so many guys. But the one thing I've been, I won't say I've been lucky. I've been intuitive enough to find the right mentors and to realize, I think, when people say, oh, you fell in with the wrong crowd.
Yep.
I was intuitive enough to very much fall in with the right crowd and to be around the right people. And so as a direct result of that, my career continued to get better. And then, you look at, I met Chris Poirier when he first started at Perform Better. Bill Falk, who owned Perform Better, had talked to me about potentially making some products, recording some, again, VHS tapes. And I became friendly with Chris, who's been really instrumental in a lot of, I think my international success has a lot to do with Chris and with Perform Better and speaking and doing the things that we've been able to do. So the most interesting thing is most of these people are still good friends of mine. They're all people who I have really good relationships with. And it's sort of in the converse when you meet someone and realize that they're like a city built from burnt bridges. I think you have to look at that person and think, something is amiss here. Something's wrong. And I don't need to name names, but I know some people like that. And it's, they've been successful, but they're not friendly with anybody that they've ever worked with. Mm-hmm. Whereas I look at the opposite and think, I've gone and, Mark stayed at my house. I've gone and stayed at Mark's house. I've had great cook up here. I've had, Al stayed at my house when he came up to speak. I've been able to, I've had, Alan Cosgrove has come out, stayed with me at my house and, spoken to our staff. And I just have tried to create relationships with people that I think are the type of people that I want to be around, people that I think have value. And maybe in some ways that sounds self-serving, and I think it is. I go back to the Jack Parker thing. I can always remember Coach Parker saying to me one time when I was thinking about leaving BU and he was trying to convince me to stay and he was sort of coercing me to stay. And he said, Mike, he said, I I take good care of you because it's good for me. Don't kid yourself. and I remember thinking that, like, I appreciated the honesty of that, and then I realized that I needed to do the same thing. I need to take really good care of the people that work with me, you know, the Kevin Carrs and the Brendan Riericks and, you know, the Ken Whittiers and Steve Biglows and all these guys. But I need to take really good care of them because it's good for me. I benefit by them being good. I benefit by them being successful. And so even like our certified functional strength coach program has become a really good business. And Kevin and Brendan actually own part of it. When we started that business, we gave them equity in the business. Because I said, I don't want these kids working for me. I want them working with me. And, you know, you go back to all these ideas, but the idea of, hey, you know, would you rather have, you know, one slice of 8 pizzas or one pizza, right? I mean, I'll be fine with one slice of 8 pizzas. Mm-hmm. And then you end up in that situation where people talk about, well, he's got all these multiple income streams. I'm like, yeah, I do have multiple income streams. And I have multiple income streams because I was smart enough to facilitate multiple income streams with multiple people and have lots of really good beneficial relationships, whether it's speaking for Perform Better or making digital products with Pat Beath or doing our certifications with Kevin and Brendan or running our bricks and mortar business with Bob. Like, I've got all these things going, and they're all partnerships where I'm actively trying to help somebody else be successful because I know it makes me more successful.
Well said. You know, Mike, I want to stay with MBSC just for the time being. Social media. You have a massive following, not because someone wants to build followers in such an ego point of view, as we've mentioned, but more from growing your business and more from marketing. What advice would you give to coaches, trainers, gym owners out there when it comes to social media? I mean, you have, as I just checked this morning, over 100,000 followers on Instagram and over 50,000 on Twitter. And I know that doesn't mean much to you because it's not about that. It's about sharing and adding value. But what advice would you give to some people out there when it comes to social media?
Well, one, you've seen my presentation, so I will be as graphic as I am on this podcast as I am in my presentation. Don't be a dick. I think that would be my first piece of advice to people on social media because it is amazing. I just muted a couple guys yesterday because they're dicks.
I saw that. I was actually busy doing it the day before, where, you know, instead of blocking them, you can just mute them. They can still follow you, but you just don't want to hear them because it's full of negativity and everything. So, sorry, carry on.
and they argue for the sake of argument. They're arguing because what I realize is they're trying to generate more followers by arguing with me. Or by trying to show people that, I'm as smart as him. I can make a point, on Twitter, blah, blah, whatever. But I think if you really want genuine organic growth in your social media, then it goes back to the same idea. Give. Create content, create good content. Give people things that they can use. Don't be a dick. Don't be confrontational. Don't be angry. Don't drink and tweet. That's what I like to tell people. I've done that a few times, I'll admit. No.
Yeah, it always gets you in trouble.
The thing with social media is that really good social media growth is about organic growth. And organic growth is about people finding quality content that helps them. If someone's finding quality content that helps them, then they'll come to you and they'll come back to you. And they'll be purchasers for your products and your books and for all these things. The other thing, though, that I would say is, there's an engagement factor too. You've got to. I've been, I'm reading like Gary Vaynerchuk and guys like that. You got to go on to it's like liking people's comments, reposting people's pictures. I repost people's stories all the time. If someone's reading my book in Turkey and they put it in their story, then I put it in my story. So that people, and one, obviously it's an ad for my book in Turkish. People think, his book's in Turkish, look. But it also, that person who's following you is like, they get so excited, like, oh my God, he reposted my story. And so I think there is also the engagement factor in terms of you want to be a content producer and then you want to be an audience engager. And I try to do both of those things. And I don't know if I do either one of them as well as I'd like to, but that's another factor that you get into is you can't get caught up in the perfectionism part of it. wish I could give credit for the quote, but years ago I read a quote where the guy said, never give 100%. He said, give 90 because the remaining 10 will drive you crazy. And I remember thinking, that's right. Like 90 is still an A. It's like an A minus. But if I could do 90 work in all of these areas all the time, I'd be way more successful and probably way healthier and feel way better than trying to be that 100%er every day. And it's sort of, you give yourself permission to be a little bit imperfect. And I'll give you a really good example. My first book, I just got tired of writing it. You write it and you rewrite it and somebody edits it and eventually I was like, something? Click, send, here it is.
Yep.
Done. And I remember thinking, like, I don't even like this book. I think it kind of sucks, you know what I mean? Because I just felt like, God, I could start over again and rewrite every chapter and they'd all be better. But eventually I thought, I think I'd rather have a published book than a file in my computer that I'm constantly working on. And now that book, it sold a lot of copies. And now, obviously, I don't know if it stood the test of time well. The redone one is much better. But it served its purpose. And people read it and it helped people. So, but that was that 90% factor as opposed to thinking, oh, my God, no, I can't. I have another friend who I love and is one of the smartest guys that I know. And he's had, as long as I've known him, he's had a book in progress. So it's probably been 25, 30 years that he's been writing this book.
Wow.
And if it ever got written, who knows? War and Peace. I have no idea what it would be like. But I also know that it actually never has gotten done because this guy is such a perfectionist that it's sort of by the time he gets to the end, he has to go back. It's like road paving in the United States. Once they've finished fixing all the roads, they go back and start over and start fixing all the roads. So if you have a paving company, you're in business forever.
Yeah, Mike, it's. I've written a few books myself, and I've never finished a book thinking that was good. And here's the thing: that maybe they aren't good, but the same feeling as well of like, I just had to submit it because you can sit and you can change it and you can change it. I was listening to John Maxwell, the leadership expert and author. And his publishers came back to him and said, he had a bestseller. I think it sold over 1 million copies 20 years ago. And they came back to him, I think it was in 2013, 2014, and says, we'd like you to, update the edition. Could you change 15% or 20% of the book? And he read the book and he thought, my goodness me, I'm just going to actually rewrite this whole book because his he had changed his mind on things, he had learned things. And it always takes me back to a line that I won't forget. It was actually at a presentation of yours in Dublin, Ireland, which I attended, which was probably about 6-7 years ago. I have no idea how long it is now. But you said if your program is the same as it was 10 years ago, you're either a genius or it really stinks. And I think it gets back to that mindset of continually being a life learner, something that I learned from you as well, of moving forward and learning and staying open-minded, as we spoke about already. Just one last thing on the social media thing. I have this thing called HIP, and it's HIP. It stands for if you're going to post something, is it helpful, is it inspiring, and is it positive? Because if it isn't one of those three, then don't post it.
Oh, that's a pretty good idea.
So stay hip on your social media, because helpful, it can help somebody, it adds value, whatever it may be. Inspiring and positive, that always creates a good vibe as well. But we're getting pushed for a little bit of time here because I know you're super busy there, Mike. But let's change a little bit of the direction. Let's go to parents. And I know you have a lot of programs ranging there at MBSC from youth kids to adults. When it comes to youth sports, what advice could you give sports parents? Because I know obviously you have 3 kids yourself. You have Michaela, who's playing a high level of hockey as well. But what advice? Because you've been one yourself, so you've been there. Yeah. What advice could you give?
Actually, I only have 2 kids.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
2's plenty. But Michaela and Mark. And Mark
3 grandkids.
Mark is turned no grandkids. No.
Oh.
Michaela's not. Nope. I'm lucky. I still have. I'm 60, almost 61. I have a 15-year-old downstairs doing his Zoom schooling or whatever it is. So. But the thing with the advice with parents is actually, it still goes back to the same idea of doing the next right thing and doing things for the right reason. And that my favorite, I have these little coasters that a friend of mine gave me one years ago. It says, prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child. And I think that's the best advice that you can have for parents, is realizing, okay, why am I doing this? Why is my kid involved in sport? Obviously, I've been very lucky. My daughter is a full scholarship player at the Division I level. My son may very well be a Division I level lacrosse player. I'm not quite sure yet. I know he's going to be pretty good. I don't know how good. But I've never approached it with, oh, we're chasing a scholarship, or, we're trying to get the money, or any of that stuff. It was all very much about, I want them to be quality people. I even went to the point of, I used to argue with people, because in our area, obviously with hockey, it was always about being on the best team, the undefeated team, the team that won every tournament. And I kind of looked at people and I said, I don't think that's what I want for my daughter. I think I want my daughter to lose some games. And I want my daughter, because if all she does is win, she's eventually going to lose. Like, at some point in her career, she's going to lose, and she's going to be unprepared. And I would have parents sometimes after games who'd come out and they'd be all angry about the game. Oh my, what did you think about that game? And I'm like, it was a good game. We lost 2-1, or we lost 3-2, whatever it was. Good game. All I'm looking for is well played contests. Some we win, some we lose. Perfect. And they'd be all mad about the officiating, or about this or about that. And I'm like, nah, I don't care about any of that stuff. All I really care about, and I can become as parental as anybody some days. I think we all have our days. But in general, I was always looking at this and thinking, I want my kids to be well-functioning adults. That should be the goal of them. I was very lucky, and I don't even know why. Like I said, sometimes just things happen. But my dad was a high school teacher, coach, and then a high school principal eventually. But I wrote my senior research paper actually on competition and cooperation. And I was reading like early Rainer Martin's stuff, who's now, I believe, was the founder of Human Kinetics Publishing. But at that time, he was a writer in like the early sports psych era. But I remember reading early on about the idea of you had to learn both cooperation and competition to be successful in a team setting. And that stuck with me in terms of, it's not, you don't want to be just a great competitor. At some point, you have to be a great cooperator. At some point, you have to be able to see the big picture. You have to be able to want other people to be successful. And I think parents, a lot of times, they don't do that next right thing. They don't have the purity of motive, and it shows. You can see it in their kid. I've seen numerous instances where people think, I'm not recruiting that kid because of the parents.
Now that is good advice. I mean, I was actually just on a phone call yesterday with a parent whose kid is playing under 10 tennis down here in Florida, and as you know, down here in Florida, we have some desperate golf and tennis parents throwing their kids into sports at a very, very young age. But he was just telling me that the kid is winning absolutely everything in the under 10 division, and when he puts her in under 12, she starts losing. And I said, great. I said, you should get a combination of both. Learn how to lose, because if this kid is just winning, same principle as well, she's going to lose later. Just the exact same principle you had. She's not going to know how to handle it. And
right.
and I've seen it so many times, especially working in the tennis arena. You have these superstar 12, 13-year-olds, and they hit around the age of 15, 16, where other kids have developed, got athletically better, mentally stronger, and they just can't handle it. They can't handle the moment. There's a bit of pressure, or they get beaten, and then in most cases they disappear. So that progress should be steady. But let me, Mike, let me ask you this: a parent comes to you and says, and I've had this before, my kid needs to develop some grit and toughness. What do you tell them?
Basically, what I would tell them is, okay, you probably need to be harder on that kid at home. Because most of the time when they're telling you that, they've spoiled the kid rotten, and then they want you to undo all the ruin that they've wreaked on this poor kid, with their sort of financial prosperity and all of the other foolishness that goes along with a lot of what we see in youth sport. And then they wonder why the kid's not mentally tough. And it's that idea of, preparing the child for the path, not the path for the child. Sometimes you got to get out of the way. My daughter's a really good example. When I very first, she started in hockey, and my wife, who's probably listening in the background here somewhere, like she usually is during these podcasts, would give me these looks because I would say to her, since she gets it, she's playing, she's playing chess. These other kids playing checkers. She knew what was going on when she was 10 years old. She was making plays that you're not supposed to make at 10 years old. And a lot of it was from hanging around the rink and being around players and watching games. And, she just had a big advantage at that time. But I remember looking at her and thinking, this kid's going to be – I really believed when she was 10 that she was going to be a Division I scholarship ice hockey player. And I sound like every lunatic parent at that time, but I really did believe that. But the reason I'm saying it is, but I would take her, we'd go, we'd get used skates. We'd go to, get sticks off the bargain rack. Like, I made sure that she was not that kid, the rich kid who showed up with, the $300 stick and the $600 skates. And she'd show up and she'd have, whatever stick was in the bargain rack at the local sporting goods store that week. That was the one that she played with. And she'd have, her cousin's used skates on that we got because they were free and her cousin was giving them away. And I could have afforded to buy everything that she needed. But I made a very firm point of not doing that because I didn't want her. What I saw is that the soft kids, the kids who needed mental toughness, they had the best gear. They had the best equipment. Do you know what I mean? They had all the trappings of success, but they didn't. People I can remember, we had parents who used to come to us during soccer. She was a really good soccer player, and look at us and say, "I wish my kid competed like your kid." And I'd think, well, you should take your kid to more games, probably. Introduce them to more athletes, get them in more positive environments instead of constantly trying to grease the skids for them, constantly trying to game the system. How do I get them on a better team? Can I start my own team? Can I sponsor the team? You know what I mean? That kind of thing is always what goes on. And it's, you just can't get away from the cliches, right? That you reap what you sow. Yeah. And if you're a scammer and a game player and a person who's always playing the angles, and then you wonder why your kid lacks the sort of whatever, the motor, the stick-to-itiveness, the internal part of the thing that you want that we call mental toughness, you can look at it and think, well, I didn't breed that in. And I keep clichéing you to death, but I always think about the number one thing you want to give your kids is what you got, not what you didn't get. And I think so many parents are worried about giving their kids what they didn't get growing up. I look at it and think, I wanted my kid to get what I got growing up. I got a dad who was a coach who had a very firm sense of right and wrong. I can remember wanting to quit football in junior high, and took me the longest time. Probably took me 2 weeks to tell my father I wanted to quit. My father was a real good college football player at that time. Could have played in the NFL, but you could make as much money teaching school as you would playing in the NFL. So he became a school teacher instead. But
times have changed.
Yeah, changed. You're not kidding. But I remember him saying to me, "No problem, you can quit," and thinking like, the weight of the world off my shoulders. That was the great. I can't believe he's going to let me stop playing. And so I was like, oh, good. I'm going to turn my stuff in tomorrow. And he's like, no, you can quit. Like, after the season's over, you don't have to play next year. And I kind of looked like, and he's like, yeah, when the season's over, you can give up football. I don't care if you play football or not. He said, I really do care that you finish the season out, obviously, but I don't care if you play football next season. And that's, it was like, suddenly, like all my air got let out, and of course, the next 5 years, whatever, I continued to play football because I ended up enjoying it. But in those moments, you get these opportunities with your kids to, I guess, to help define them, to help create what is going to really be their thought process.
It's all about accountability, isn't it? I mean, the lesson your father was teaching you is if you start something, you finish it. You're going to be accountable for it.
Yeah, and accountability, you have to go to practice. I mean, I can't tell you how many kids I know who play on two teams but never go to practice. And my kids, they're like, well, you have practice. You don't have to go to practice. It's optional. I'm like, no, it's not. Practicing is never optional.
Yeah.
Not if you want to be good. I'd always say to them, everybody can be average. Like it's easy to be average.
Let me ask you this, Mike. You've worked with a lot of young athletes, and like I said, you have a lot of young athletes at MBSC there. What do you see in a young athlete, let's just say 12, 13, 14, where you go, that kid's going to be good?
You know what you see? Good genetics, Allistair, and you know it and I know it. I had a girl today. Her dad played college football, college baseball, and college hockey. Her mom was on one of our Olympic teams in women's ice hockey. And you watch her move. She's 14 years old, and you're like, genetic lottery winner. But now this goes back. So, and Steve Bigelow, one of my coaches, said it to me. So you go back to Genius in All of Us, and in Genius in All of Us, Schenk talks about the idea that it's genetics times environment. So I feel like if you can give me that genetic 10, and I can put him in MBSC in what I think is a 10 environment, 10 times 10 is 100. You know, if you give me a genetic 10 and I put him in a shitty 1 environment, 1 times 10 is 10. So, there's going to be a growth factor by being in the right places, but it's also knowing what the right place is. So many people think that the right place is, the winningest team. And that's not necessarily the right place. That's just, that might be just another stop off on the Rich Parents Club. And you've got to realize, I don't want to be a member of the Rich Parents Club. I want my kid to be successful. I don't need to be around, the movers and shakers and the hedge fund managers and, all of these people. I'll happily be, whatever on some other team with kids that are more like my kids and people that are more like me. And I think in the long run, those kids will be better off than one of these teams that's constantly trying to beat the system. Because, it's terrible, but in youth sports, it's like that's an epidemic in and of itself is, how can we beat the system? How can we game the system? How can we get into the college of our choice kind of thing? We've seen it. You look at that Varsity Blues thing. Hey, it got to the point where people just made up sports and resumes and paid for it. Here, my kid's a crew coxswain. My kid's a tennis player or whatever. Doc Photoshop a couple pictures, phone up a resume, find a coach who'll take, 50 grand or 60 grand in a bribe, and you're off to the races.
Yep. Mike, obviously, we're a little pushed for time here, so thanks so much for taking it. We didn't even get into speaking about the Boston Red Sox, and obviously, you won the World Series that year as well with them, 2013, I think it was. You've been with the Boston Bruins. So you've been around so many incredible athletes for 30 plus years. What have you seen in athletes that separate the best from the rest? And I know this could be an answer that we could talk about the whole afternoon, but maybe just 1 or 2 qualities that you've seen in the best because you've worked with the very best.
Well, I still think, I always keep coming back to, it's always going to come back to genetics. The best of the best usually have, and again, I keep referring to books, but Epstein's book. Oh my God! Please.
Talent Code?
No, that's Daniel Coyle. Epstein was.
Geez, I'm busy looking on my shelf here right now. It's there.
If I could my bookshelf, I'd be able to tell you. But either way, Epstein was basically talking about. People have always, debated this genetics times environment thing, or is it genetics, is it environment, is it nature, is it nurture? There is no question that genetics plays a huge part in this. When you see the hand-eye coordination that some of these people possess, someone who can shoot a hockey puck or throw a baseball or hit a baseball, you look and think, I don't know if that's a teachable quantity or not.
Range. That's the book, is it?
Yeah. No, range is the second one.
Okay.
Don't worry. When I stop thinking about it, it'll pop into my head.
Sorry.
But so I do think the biggest, strongest factor is always going to be that genetic one. And then there are certain sports where work ethic matters. And then there's some where it really makes no difference at all. I look at, baseball was a perfect example of that. In baseball is a talent-dominated sport. There's no room for grinders. Hockey, there's fourth line guys, there's fifth and sixth defensemen. You can work your butt off and become that guy. Baseball doesn't have that. If you can't hit the ball 25 times out of 100, you're not a Major League Baseball player, no matter how hard you work at it. And you might work really, really hard, but you can't hit Major League pitching. I did a pitching talk one time, and the analogy that I used, I had a milk crate. I showed a picture of a milk crate. I said, okay, if I put this milk crate, if I nail it to the wall 60 feet, 6 inches away, I said, if you can throw the ball in a milk crate, you're like a low A ball pitcher. I said, if you can make the ball curve or sink into the milk crate, you're maybe a double-A pitcher. I said, if you can tell me what corner of the milk crate the ball is going to go in and then make it go there with some level of manipulation, you're a major league pitcher. You know what I mean? And it's it's a skill that's, I think, above and beyond any other sports skill that exists. And I say this all the time, and I'm not a baseball person, but there are numerous guys who failed at baseball who went on to become NFL quarterbacks. So some guy can't make it in baseball and then goes and plays the most difficult position in football, the most storied position in football, but they weren't even good enough. The Tom Brady's, guys, they got drafted in baseball. There's more money in baseball than there is in any other sport. And there's probably a reason that there is. And people are saying they don't look like great athletes. Like, they don't have to.
And Michael Jordan going to baseball.
Yeah, Michael Jordan going to baseball and not succeeding. There's examples of that all over the place. So I just think that genetics plays a huge part. So you can't – I'd love to say that it doesn't, but it does. And so you just can't factor that out. You can't look at that and say, if you work hard. I feel like if you work really, really hard, it's like school. You can maybe raise yourself a letter grade. But, if you're a B, you could become an A. But if you're a C, you probably can't become an A. C might become a B. And I think that you'd probably see that, like you've seen it. You'd probably see it in tennis. You'd probably see it in soccer. You'd probably see it in most other sports where you can't will yourself. If you could will yourself to be great at sports, I'd be great at sports. I learned a lot about sports because I tried really hard to be good at sports. But, things like, hand-eye coordination, I could never pitch. I was never a great hitter. You know what I mean? There's like just a lot of things that there's a genetic predisposition there.
Mike, you're absolutely spot on because, while you've been talking, I've just been thinking of some of the athletes I've worked with and some of the athletes I've read about. And you're absolutely right. Every single one that I know who's made it to the world stage has had a parent or both parents played a very, very high level of sports. Just recently, there's the Korda family. Peter Korda was number 2 in the world in tennis, and all 3 of his kids are professional athletes now. The mom was a professional athlete herself, so the two girls are playing on the LPGA tour, and the son just reached the 4th round in the French Open. So there's an example. One of the Russian athletes I worked with as well. Mother was a professional handball player. Father was a professional cyclist. So I think you're absolutely spot on with that call of genetics.
But it still is genetics and then the right environment and the right parenting. But I'll give you a perfect example. Sloane Stephens. Mm-hmm. I coached her mom in college. I couldn't believe I saw her mom one day when she got interviewed. And I was like, oh, my God, that's Sybil Smith.
Yep.
She was a great swimmer at Boston University. And she ended up marrying a guy named John Stevens, who was a running back for the Patriots, who actually died in a car crash. But you look at her and think, here's a kid. Dad was a pro football player. Mom was a national caliber swimmer in college. And what do you get? And these Keith Kachuk that played for us at Boston University has 2 sons that play in the NHL that were first round draft picks. The NHL draft usually has 5 or 6 kids in the first round who are children of former players.
Yeah.
But it's still that makes the parenting piece that much better because for every one of those kids, there's a kid that ends up, gets crushed by the pressure and ends up on drugs or suicide or, this. So it's the genetics it's like giving you a halfway start in the race, but then you've got to shepherd them through the finish, knowing that you got a head start and not sort of ruining the race. And I think what happens with a lot of parents is that they ruin the race.
Mm-hmm. And we could talk about this forever, but and I'm definitely going to get you back on again, Mike, because I've really enjoyed this conversation. But we look at Formula One motorsport, for example. You see a few years later the same names cropping up, and it's the kids of the former drivers. Piquet, Senna was there. Rosberg, for example, and that's a good example as well, is that, Keke Rosberg was the father, and Nico Rosberg won the Formula One championship in 2016. But Keke basically did create the right environment, create the right mindset, but then passed Nico on at 16 and said, now you're ready to move on with somebody else to mentor you. So, like I said, we could chat about this forever. Last 2 or 3 questions, Mike. Book that you're reading right now. I think you mentioned earlier the Customer
Rules. Lee Cockrell. So Lee Cockrell wrote Creating Magic. He's a former Disney executive. Creating Magic, one of my favorite all-time books. And then Pat Rigsby was nice enough to send me Lee's follow-up book, which is sort of a double entendre, double play on words. The Customer Rules. So it's either the Customer Rules or the Customer Rules. Like rules for customers or the customer ruling your business. And really good book. I've been reading that. I'll be done with that probably in 2 more days, based on my current reading pace. So I'm very into customer service right now because I think that, especially in this sort of post-COVID thing, that it becomes even that much more important.
Agree. All-time best book?
I always go back to How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that I feel like everybody in the world, if I was running the school system, that would be like mandatory reading in 10th grade.
Yeah, Dale Carnegie. I think it's time for me to read that again. It's probably been about 3-4 years, so I think that's going to be my next book. One follower that you have to follow on social media. Who is it? Someone that you should follow on social media.
That's a good one. One follow. You know who right now? If I said, and it's going to seem totally bizarre, but there's this kid, Jake Tura, Tuura, who's just, I think he must have had some bad patella tendonitis, and he's become one of these guys who's, like his life's work is exploring the tendon world. So I've been listening to his podcast, which I yesterday called the worst named podcast because it's called the Jacked Athlete Podcast. And he had a guy named Keith Barr on there, who's a famous tendon researcher, and it was so good. So he'd be one if someone was saying, okay, someone I don't follow Jake and just look at and go back and listen to his podcast and podcast guests. Because I think for me, the tendon research thing is really interesting because it's kind of filling in a blank that hasn't been filled in, for me anyway, in terms of dealing with people. We see so much chronic overuse stuff, and I don't think we're prepared to deal with it. We don't know that, is it ice, is it rest, is it injections? And they've got a really good formula from an exercise standpoint, how you would handle that. The other one is Tony Holler, who's the Feed the Cats guy. I don't know if you've ever run across Tony.
Heard of that, yep.
Yeah, Tony's another really interesting follow because he's sort of he's my mirror reflection in terms of he's a 61-year-old retired high school chemistry teacher, balding, glasses, looks very similar to me, but who's been very instrumental in changing the way that we think about speed and as a result how we train. So those would be 2 pretty interesting ones for people.
Awesome stuff. Mike, we've gone well over our time here, so thanks again for taking the time to come onto the podcast, and most of all, thank you for being a mentor to so many of us out there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all that you're doing, all the writing. Like I said, I refer to your big 4 all the time. In a little bit, I will be taking my 20-minute nap, which it's like you gave me permission.
Yeah, I never miss it. I'm going to have one after lunch. But last thing, social media platforms you can follow you on Twitter at mboyle. What's your Twitter handle?
Twitter is mboyle1959, and Instagram is Michael_Boyle1959 because someone already had mboyle1959. Those are the 2 big ones for me. I'm on Facebook, but I'm not as active as I used to be. It's Twitter and Instagram are really the ones that we're using a lot now.
And of course, your website is bodybyboyle.com.
Yes, and then strengthcoach.com is really like my kind of personal, everyday, I'm on there answering questions kind of website.
With Anthony Renner, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Anthony and I.
Good old Ant. You guys have done so much for the industry. Mike, have a great day. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. I'm going to sign off here, Allistair.
Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that one with Mike. Remember, this podcast is available on iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, and via my website, allistairmccord.com. Connect with me on social media, on Twitter at Allistair McCall, on Instagram, Be Champion Minded, and on Facebook, Allistair McCall page. Until next time, remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion minded.